Welcome back to the Gridiron Expert. We hope you all had a very Merry Christmas, but now it is time to get back to our 2018 College Football Bowl predictions, starting with our first three post-Christmas bowl games, and we're going to jump right on in with the First Responder Bowl. These games, of course, kicking off on December 26th, and this is a very intriguing matchup between Boston College and 25th ranked Boise State Broncos. And when the bowl games were announced, this was one game that really did catch my eye. Two very different styles of offense here, but one that I think has the chance to be one of the better bowl games of this entire postseason. We'll start over here with Boise State this time. Very, as we all know, a high-octane offense led by senior quarterback Brett Rypien, who set the Mountain West record for most passing yards in a career with 13,456 yards in his career as a Bronco. He was also named Mountain West Offensive Player of the Year for this season, and what a way to go out in his final game. Hopefully he can go out and give Boise State a key win here. The biggest question, though, is going to be, can Boise State respond after that crushing blow to Fresno State in the Mountain West championship game? Of course, we know that had they won that, had UCF lost, Boise State would have been going more likely to Fiesta Bowl or one of those New Year's Six bowl games, but they lost at home to a Fresno State team they had beaten early on in the year. So it's a crushing blow and missed out on a chance to win their conference. But so will their minds be in the right place going into this bowl game against Boston College, knowing that they could have had just a little bit more of it and maybe been put in a little bit of a better bowl game. So I'm very intrigued to watch this game and see how Brett Rypien kind of concludes his career with the Broncos. But more so than that, I'm more interested to see how Alex Madison, the running back for Boise State, who has over 1,400 yards on the ground this season, how he goes up against this Boston College defense that, usually under Steve Adazio has played fairly well. They usually are a fairly solid defense. I'm curious to see if they can take away the run game. They're going to have to force Rypien to win this game through the air, and I know he's going to be very capable of doing so. So I'm very intrigued to see how this one turns out. We know that Brian Harsin is an offensive-minded coach, and going all the way back to for over a decade with Chris Peterson and some of the former Boise State head coaches, they've always had that high-octane offense, one of the better in the Mountain West and sometimes in the entire nation. Over here with Boston College, though, you remember they were 7-2 and number 17 in the nation when they hosted Clemson and had College Game Day come to them. And since that game against Clemson, they lost out. They lost to Clemson, lost their final two games. That included a 22-21 loss over a very bad Florida State team. And yes, that game was on the road. Overall, though, you have to agree that it's been a fairly solid year for Boston College. They beat Virginia Tech. They beat Miami. And yes, neither of those schools played and were as good as they've been in recent years. But still, nonetheless, those are teams that Boston College usually does not beat. So they beat some two big ACC opponents there. The biggest key for them is, can they get something going on offense? They've usually been a fairly strong defensive team. We thought this would be the year they would break through the offensive side of the ball, and they did for a little bit. Remember, they were 7-2. They had a chance to win 8 or maybe 9 games this year and just kind of collapsed there towards the end. But can they get good play out of Anthony Brown at quarterback, who's been a little sporadic and I know has been battling some injuries? Same thing with A.J. Dillon. Kind of rushed onto the scene last year as a freshman, did a phenomenal job with the Eagles last year, had another great year this year, over 1,100 yards on the ground, but also battling some injuries. So can Boston College offense get some production going against a Boise State defense that's only allowing 22.1 points per game? I think the Broncos get a huge win in the First Responder Bowl, sending out the seniors in the right way, and will finish once again ranked nationally at the end of the season. Moving on to the Quick Lane Bowl, also later on in the afternoon on the 26th, Minnesota and Georgia Tech. The biggest storyline here, this will be the final game that Paul Johnson coaches at Georgia Tech. His final game as the Yellow Jackets. So obviously going to be very emotional there. Kind of an end in an era for Georgia Tech. He kind of came in and implemented that style of offense, that option offense that's been so difficult to stop for opponents over these past couple of years or over the past decade, 11 seasons with them. But we'll start over here with Minnesota before diving into that here in a little bit. This is the first appearance with the Golden Gophers for a post-bowl appearance for the Golden Gophers under P.J. Fleck. Entering year 2, they clinched their bowl berth with a huge win on the road at Wisconsin, who, as we know, did not live up to the hype after starting off the year, I think, number 4 in the entire nation. I'm very curious to see, once again, kind of like Boston College, how Minnesota's offense goes up against a fairly solid Georgia Tech defense here and a very young overall Minnesota team. You've got a freshman quarterback in Tanner Morgan who's thrown for just a little over 1,200 yards and 7 touchdowns. But the biggest thing is Georgia Tech defense going to be able to shut down with their star wide receiver and Tyler Johnson. First team all Big Ten, 1,112 yards through the air and 10 touchdowns, or 1,112 yards receiving this season. So the biggest thing is, can Georgia Tech shut him down? But bigger than that, can Tanner Morgan get some chemistry going with Johnson and be able to get him the ball into open space and the ability to make some plays? That's going to be very interesting to see. Minnesota's been fairly balanced across the board, 28.5 points per game on offense, allowing 27.9 points per game on the defensive side of the ball. The biggest thing, though, is they're allowing 170.7 rushing yards per game. And going up against a Georgia Tech team that, as we mentioned before, is known for the option, known for the run, not known for passing the ball hardly at all, that's not good news for this Minnesota defense. Moving on to Georgia Tech, we mentioned Paul Johnson's last game, and that's why, I think Georgia Tech here is the better team. That is why we're picking the Yellow Jackets. But when you throw some emotion onto these games, final game for a coach, final game for some of the big-time seniors, stuff like that, that adds an extra factor in there, and that Georgia Tech is going to want to send him out in the right way. Their star player, as we all know, senior quarterback Taquan Marshall, who has 824 yards to the air, but 896 yards on the ground. They're averaging 335 rushing yards per game. So I don't think this Minnesota defense has enough to shut down this very potent option offense of Georgia Tech. Paul Johnson goes out the right way after an illustrious 11-year career with the Yellow Jackets, and Georgia Tech goes home with an 8-win season. Then our final game of the 26th, California versus TCU in the Cheez-It Bowl. And I swear, every year they add more and more bowl games that just makes no sense. Everybody complains about the amount of bowl games, and then we got the Cheez-It Bowl now. We've got the Red Box Bowl now, and I'm actually in talks with people up in St. Louis to get a Gridiron Expert Bowl here in the next couple of years. I mean, it's just unbelievable how many different bowl games we've got going on. But if you like defense, this is going to be the game for you. California and TCU, both teams struggling on the offensive side of the ball this year, and have two coaches that are both very defensive-minded, and Justin Wilcox with California and Gary Patterson with TCU. We'll start with California. As I mentioned, can their offensive struggles get resolved? They're only averaging 22.8 points per game. They finished 7-5 this year, making major strides forward. This is just Wilcox's second year with the Golden Bears, and last year, as I mentioned, surprised me going 5-7, so improving by 2 games this season. They're allowing 21.3 points per game on defense, so pretty good on the defensive side of the ball. They have some struggles at quarterback. Chase Garber's been a little inconsistent, 1,400 yards on the year, 14 touchdowns and 7 interceptions. Well, they've got a solid running back in Patrick Laird, who has rushed for 932 yards, and we want him to go out on top as a senior. He's going to want to go out on top as a senior his final game with California, and what a better way to do that than getting a huge bowl win over a decent Horned Frogs team who won 3 of their last 4 games to clinch bowl eligibility, but has lost so much production on the offensive side of the ball this year. They had to get rid of Cavante Turpin for some team violations and some just allegations against him. They had to get rid of him. Sean Robinson, their star quarterback, yes, battled some injuries. He's now transferring over to Missouri, where Kelly Bryant from Clemson also went. So Missouri's going to be stacked at quarterback for the next couple of years. But give a lot of credit to Gary Patterson and what he did with his Horned Frogs team, rallying his troops in a year that we expected them to do a little bit better, rise up to number 15 in the rankings, but definitely we didn't expect them to compete for the Big 12 title or the college football playoff, much like they have in recent years. They're going to have Mike Collins at quarterback, who has played a little bit this year. I think they've played 3 different quarterbacks on offense, so TCU certainly struggling on that side of the ball. And like Minnesota, who has Tyler Johnson, they're going to want to get the ball to their star wide receiver, and Jalen Rager, who has 1,061 yards receiving and 9 touchdowns on just 72 receptions. So very impressive performance this season by him. TCU, though, a little bit better on the offensive side of the ball, 24.7 points per game. They're allowing 24.4 points per game on defense. So, once again, very balanced, very even there on terms of points scored and points allowed. But the biggest thing, and one of the main factors for TCU, is that this season they have had 6 games decided by 1 possession. And in those games, they are 4-2. Gary Patterson knows how to coach his teams and get them ready for the postseason. He always plays well in bowl games, regardless of where it is and how good his team is. I think TCU gets a huge win over California. They know how to win the close games, and Gary Patterson's going to go home with, once again, a winning record on the year with a 7-6 record overall. So I think this is going to be a very defensive and low-scoring game here, but I think in the end, TCU squeaks it out. So these are going to be next 3 bowl games. The day after Christmas, December 26th, and when we do our next set of bowl predictions, we will have our current record straight up and against the spread down here. And, of course, the spread picks for these games and every other bowl game coming out on Twitter. Same goes for prediction changes. And make sure you keep checking us out here on YouTube for all the remaining bowl predictions. We're getting closer and closer to the college football playoff, obviously the two biggest games of this entire postseason. So we're going to have a special video dedicated just to that. So make sure you keep checking us out on here. And as always, please continue to like, comment, and subscribe. And we will see you next time on The Gridiron Expert.